Hello everyone, this is part 7 of What If Deku Married Toga, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The sun had long since set, lights in the top floor apartment a clear indication of someone being home. So why the occupant doesn't respond to Himiko Toga's shrill shout of his name, ni, as drawn out as it may be, still remains a wonder to her. The blonde raps her knuckles against the door, not for the first time, as she leans an ear to it. Despite receiving no response after yet another failure, she remains firmly planted at the welcome mat. Her next whine isn't any less indignant, "Come on, I know you're home." Only when she follows it with a threat, "Don't make me bust the door down," does she finally get a response. It's open. Akatani speaks at a much lower decibel, making the girl's straining worthwhile. Himiko balks at the revelation, really? Before actually trying the knob. When it turns and the door swings open, she shakes her head in further exaggerated disbelief. That's not a good way to prevent robberies, ya know. She shuts the door behind her as though to emphasize her point. Akatani doesn't play along, his energy dwindled to the point of non-existence. He sprawled across his couch in a pair of black shorts and a white t-shirt, one arm hanging loosely over the side that his hand touches the floor. His voice still low enough to be a whisper. "What are you doing here, Himiko?" He lazily drawls a question. Though admittedly surprised by the boy's attitude, Himiko isn't wavered by it. She has a pep in the steps that carry her over to his bedside. "I went to Anteiku to surprise you, but your boss said you called in sick today." She then hoists up a shopping bag that Akatani had failed to notice earlier. "So I brought you some medicine." Himiko pauses, seemingly noticing the drugs she bought the same time he does. Before he can even get the chance to sit up and sift through the bag's contents himself, she's already doing her own rummaging. "Oh, wait, does medicine taste bad to you too?" She recalls the side effect of the ghoul's quirk as she searches for something to give him. It tastes bad for everyone anyways." Taking the bag from her, Akatani sets it on the floor in a particular spot where nobody will trip over it. "I'm not sick. That was just an excuse to not have to work." He finally raises his voice to a normal frequency so he can quell any concerns for his health. That isn't like you." Himiko tilts her head in confusion. She hadn't expected that of him. She just as quickly dismisses the lie to his boss though, concern shifted to other matters. "You owe me 800 yen then." She gestures to the medicine she bought before glancing around the apartment. "Where's Eri?" Reminded of the real reason for his sudden reclusiveness, Akatani plops back down onto the cushioning of his couch. He may as well rip it off like a band-aid and tell it to her straight, he figures. "The heroes and police found me." He closes his eyes in anticipation of what he's sure will be a rambunctious response. "You let them take her." His expectations are met when Himiko shouts incredulously at him. It didn't take her long to connect the dots and realize the reason for Eri's absence based on the bomb he dropped. He really doesn't want to deal with this right now. He's already trying to process what happened himself and his own emotions. He heaves out a heavy sigh, sinking deeper into the couch, hoping that it'll swallow him up. When it doesn't, he forces himself to open his eyes in order to fix Himiko with a hard stare. What else was I supposed to do? He genuinely wants to know what other choice he had in the matter. Himiko throws her hands up in the air. Whether the gesture be because she feels the answer is obvious or that she herself doesn't know is only unclear for a mere moment. "Fight them. Rip them apart. Something." Her suggestions fly out with swipes of her hands that make her spiral and fall on the couch beside Akatani. He shakes his head with what minimal energy he can muster. "It was a hero. Not the Yakuza. What's the difference so long as they're trying to take Eri from you?" Himiko crosses her arms under her small bust as she challenges Akatani on his excuse. He glances up at her in disbelief, taken aback by the sincerity in her tone. He'd forgotten about this side to her. Himiko had proven a few times that she can be a bit intense. He just hadn't expected her to suggest he kill heroes on top of criminals. He was certain that they agreed a line must be drawn somewhere. The difference is that the Yakuza wanted to hurt Eri. This hero wants to help. He assumes that she's just being protective of the little girl. But when he sees the same sincerity in her eyes as she says, "Akatani, you should know by now that heroes don't want to help people like us," he knows it's more than having an attachment to Eri. For her, it's personal. Akatani's brows furrow, his frustration leaking into his expression. It's not like he doesn't care about Eri too. It's just that he trusts heroes a little more than she does. Deep down inside, he's still a hero otaku. Plus, he had a fair amount of time to get acquainted with Eraserhead. This one is different. I can tell. He knows not all heroes are like All Might, good or bad as that comparison may be. Himiko huffs, still not taking him seriously. Does your quirk make you psychic too now? Her sarcastic remark has Akatani sitting up to address her on a more personal level. Wanting to be taken seriously and for his word to hold some merit, Akatani recalls the incident more vividly. He could have erased my quirk, Himiko. A SWAT team could have shot me full of tranquilizers, or a team of heroes could have overpowered me before I even knew what happened. They had the element of surprise. The hardness in his tone is its own sincerity. Hearing how easily he could have been captured, Himiko lowers her guard a little. Her eyes soften and she uncrosses her arms, thinking about how close of a call Akatani being cornered truly was. So why didn't they? Her voice wobbles as it sways between anger and sorrow. Seeing how difficult it is for her to process the news, Akatani takes Himiko's hand in his own as an attempt to comfort her. He wanted to talk to me first. He wanted to give me a chance. He gives her hand a soft squeeze to let her know he's still there for her. If that's not a real hero, then I don't know what is. Himiko looks as though she wants to say more, continue trying to dispute the decision to hand Eri over, but refrains. Instead, she admits defeat as well. Her shoulders drop and her head hangs. So that's it. You're just giving up. Seeing the fight drain from her system, Akatani allows his own to fade. Like I said, a hero has her. She's in good hands. Probably better than mine. His gaze falls to he and Himiko's intertwined fingers. Why are you so opposed? Himiko stares off into the distance, looking at nothing nor no one in particular. Heroes take away the things I want. When her eyes return to Akatani, he lifts his head to meet them, the things that I love. The boy blushes at the slight confession, but forces himself to maintain eye contact as she continues speaking. They took Eri away. And they almost took you too. Love, Akatani nearly chokes on the word. He pulls away and coughs into the hand that he was using to hold Himiko's. Whatever. They let me off the hook. Sorta. He shakes his head to clear away any romantic thoughts and returns the conversation to its original point of origin. My point is that you don't have to worry about them locking me up and Eri is just as free. Himiko blinks in reaction to his reaction. Having already had one intense conversation for the day though, she decides to save that one for another time. What do I need to worry about then? She sighs while standing up. You're going to make me stress eat. She travels from the couch to the kitchen while asking, you still have food in your fridge? Though the topic of discussion is no longer about heroes, Akatani isn't quite able to forget about Eri. After all, she's the only reason why the place is stocked with ordinary food. And the cabinets. Help yourself. He falls back onto the couch with just as heavy a heart as he had when Himiko first intruded. Himiko raids the fridge while saying, I'm no hero, but I want to help you, Akatani. And returns with a bright red apple. Eri's favorite. If the heroes can take Eri, then let me take you away. Yeah, she takes a bite from the fruit once she arrives back at the couch. Having already exhausted what energy he could muster to argue with her, he isn't prepared for what the blonde has up her sleeve now. Akatani lulls his head to the side, eyelids drooping just as much. What do you mean? There's a glimmer in the blonde's eye that wakes Akatani back up. Instead of laying around here sulking all day, let's go on a date. She holds out her free hand for him to take. Akatani pauses just as he's about to grab it. Date. He'd like to blame his short-circuited brain on being drowsy, considering they'd already been on one before according to her. Himiko finishes the reach for him and takes his hand in hers. Yeah. It'll cheer you up. I don't know, but the boy is still much too reluctant to move just yet. Himiko tugs on his arm, trying to get him to budge. Come on. It'll be fun, but to no avail. Only when the blonde resorts to violence by throwing her apple at his head does he give in. All right, fine. He groans like an old man with weak knees as he stands up to go. But of course, the date night is that of two teens. They're young and full of vigor. Nor are they ordinary. Roaming rooftops brings them closer to the stars. Spring in their step carries them from building to building. Akitani's mask warms his face when the cool breeze brushes through his hair. The type of thrill that they get from this above-average form of parkour is greater than any simple type of outing. There's nothing quite like a hunt or a predator. Even if Akitani is no longer allowed to eat his quarry, there's something about the actual action of instinct. When they come across a purse snatcher who's completely oblivious to their stalking, there's no comparison to that kind of euphoria. The ghoul drops from above, tentacles wrapping the prey using powerful suctions, momentum of the strike throwing coils around the victim's body. The red limbs constrict, going for a quick suffocation. They squeeze. Every time the prey exhales, they squeeze a little more tightly. Himiko doesn't even get a chance to do anything herself. She draws back and watches as Akitani handles the purse snatcher himself. Normally, she'd be content with doing so. It's enticing to her to watch the ghoul hunt. However, this is notably different from those other times. He's not enjoying it himself. Not truly. There's something smaller than the red speck in his Kakugan which spurs him on. Akitani always hunts with aggression. The release of rage is always evident. Except, there's no burst of agony this time. Blood doesn't spill and none of that sorrow is shed. He nearly rips the purse snatcher apart, but he stops himself. He holds back for the sake of the promise he made to Eraserhead. The thief is rendered unconscious instead, let off easy. Acts of vigilantism, regardless of restraint, is sure to still cause him trouble. And yet, it's not even worth it to him. As he leaps from roof to roof with Himiko in search of another criminal to vent through, he feels just as empty as he did when leaving his apartment. Himiko spends the rest of the night in a similar state of unrest. She studies Akitani rather than joining in, no longer having any fun either. However, there's no knowing what the ghoul's face looks like as he does all this. There's no telling what sort of sad expression he's making. Nobody knows when he has a mask to hide it. Anteiku's wooden floor had aged, its boards creaking under the pressure of every step. Even though it's just another routinal day at the coffee shop, Akitani can't help but feel although he's being trampled upon just the same. The passing customers don't demand much, just for him to pour coffee from a silver pot into the blue onion flower cups arrayed at each table. Yet, the tin feels heavy enough in his hand to be a dumbbell. The young barista absent-mindedly places a dessert plate decorated with a caramel flan on one of the tables. He'd normally be anxious under the anticipation of waiting on Eraserhead given ordinary circumstances, but his excursion last night has him extra stressed. If the underground hero found out he's still operating as a vigilante, regardless of restraint, he worries that he'd really no longer be able to see Eri. Every time the door chime indicates another customer, Akitani's head swivels to see if it's the little girl and her new guardian. He instead notices what's playing inaudibly from a television mounted above the checkout counter. It's across the way from where the boy is currently standing so that he can see it at the perfect angle. What's being shown has him just as entranced as he was with his own thoughts. The morning news covers a story about Japan's most prestigious hero school. Apparently, the Ua barrier was destroyed. Or rather, it was disintegrated. Already, Akitani speculates the reasons and possibilities as to how or why. It had recently been announced that All Might began teaching there. A reporter or member of the paparazzi could have simply wanted to get a big scoop. However, there's always the concern of more sinister motives. Before the boy can get too lost in thought, his mind is returned to its original focus. The door chime alerts him to their arrival before he hears Eri's gleeful, "Akatani." That's the only warning he gets before a little blur covers the span of the cafe to slam straight into his legs. Overwhelmed with an equally delighted emotion, Akitani can't help but laugh with somewhat relative relief. It's from an awkward angle that he has to bend down at the waist, but he happily returns the little girl's hug. "I missed you too, Eri." The smile on his face is genuine as he takes in her presence. As though they'll take her away from him again, he lifts his head to check on the others that came through the door. Aizawa isn't alone. Accompanying him is the detective, Naomasa. Akitani eyes them for a moment, lowering his voice for Eri alone. "Have they been treating you well?" When he feels Eri nod against his legs, the rest of him loosens. The tense tightening of his shoulders lets them drop a little. Whether it's because the detective heard or saw Akitani's concern for the girl, nobody can be sure. It's his job to be perceptive. Naomasa tries to reassure the boy with a smile. She's in good hands. It's the best attempt at comfort that he can offer. But Akitani isn't in the best of moods to perceive it as an attempt of peace. I didn't ask you. His words have a bite to them that reminds the detective of how animalistic the boy can be. That the young barista isn't an average teenager. He's the Tokyo Ghoul. Aizawa takes a step forward, the foot meant to be put in between the two opposing sides of law each one represents. She's safe. His assurances seem to reach Akitani instead of the detectives. Suddenly, it's a reminder that he is the one caring for Eri and not Naomasa, putting Akitani at ease. You can trust us. Aizawa's eyes meet the boy's to let him know that he's sincere. Akitani holds Eri closer to him anyways. Having her there in his arms helps to calm his nerves, but he still can't help but shake his worries. Not after what the television showed. The Ua barrier. I saw on the news. He starts to vocalize his concern but gets stopped short. Everything's under control. Aizawa is quick to allay Akitani's worry yet again. He sounds so sure of himself. Akitani remembers that the man is not just a pro hero, but a teacher at the hero school too. He's on the front lines in both potentially dangerous scenarios. But it's because of that lifestyle that Akitani is worried in the first place. Is it? She could have been hurt. He doesn't want to consider what would have happened if somebody malicious had broken into a place to hurt children. Aizawa's eyes narrow just the slightest bit. The slight glare makes Akitani realize how hypocritical he's being. It's not like his own vigilante lifestyle had given Eri the safest living environment. A's teacher's lounge is one of the safest and most secure places she can be. He makes a fair point that heroes are there to protect her as well. But Aizawa isn't looking him in the eye anymore. Naomasa looks over at the underground hero with a bit of surprise, then back at Akitani. The motion doesn't go unnoticed. The detective sighs before saying, "Come on, Aizawa. The kid doesn't need my quirk to know that was a lie." Aizawa's stare switches to Naomasa. It wasn't. And that makes the detective pause momentarily. Naomasa waits a second before shaking it off. Then, he explains, the barrier being destroyed so that the paparazzi and reporters could get in wasn't an accident. We're investigating whether this deliverance was malicious or just for the sake of some lucky scoop on All Might, and Akitani is grateful for him not sugarcoating the truth at the very least. Aizawa hangs his head, ashamed for having hidden that truth from the boy who had entrusted Eri to him. Having it out in the open now, it was a declaration of war. A distraction. He shares his own outlook on it. Naomasa raises a brow in the underground hero's direction. I thought taking care of a child would get you to drop your conspiracy theory hobby. I don't think it's just a conspiracy. It did seem strange. Akitani defends Aizawa's reasoning with his own suspicions. Seeing the detective isn't quite as easily convinced, Aizawa elaborates. In all the years UA has prospered, has it ever once been infiltrated like today? His question makes Naomasa swallow whatever retort had been on the tip of his tongue prior to that thought. The detective considers that factor. However, it's something that'll have to be mulled over in his office and not a coffee shop. Enough. This isn't something to be discussed in front of civilian children. He ends it there before he and Aizawa overshare something important about the investigation. Especially since, and I'm saying that lightly when not taking other components into account, Akitani has his own criminal record. He stares at the boy, not seeing a hint of ghoulish evil hidden in him. No offense. Akitani shrugs impassively, none taken. Interjecting herself into the conversation now that it's essentially ended, Akitani, Eri tentatively looks up at the boy she's latched onto. His smile returning to put her at ease, Akitani looks down to meet her gaze. Yeah. His voice is much softer with her than it was with the adults. But Eri still hesitates. She shyly looks away before requesting, "Can you tell Todoroki and Shinso-san I said hi?" Akitani's eyes widen briefly, surprised by the affectionate nicknames she had given their friends. It seems that he isn't the only one that she's missed seeing. His smile wobbles a bit as he holds back tears. "I sure can," and he ruffles her hair much to her dismay. Listening in, Aizawa's own eyes widen in shock as well. He recognizes the names of the boys Eri mentioned, one of which is a student in his class. He's not sure what their connection to the boy and girl is, but as curious as he is, he decides to let it go for now. The rest of Eri's visit to Anteiku is a lot more enjoyable for her and Akitani. The mood takes a more light-hearted tone when Yoshimura joins in on the reunion. They enjoy each other's time and company, not taking any of it for granted. But sooner or later, it ends. Eri leaves with Aizawa and Akitani is left alone again. All he has after she's gone to remember her by is the promise he made to her. He goes to the quirk support group so that he can keep his word. As expected, the coffee machine in the hallway is where he runs into Shinso first. I thought I'd find you here, he jokingly greets the fellow insomniac and coffee addict. Shinso steps aside so that Akitani can fish his own canned coffee from the vending machine. I should be saying that to you. When Akitani's back is turned, Shinso allows a lazy smile to cross his face. Long time, no see. Hearing Shinso, Akitani scratches the back of his head as though he'll be able to dig out a proper excuse for his absence. I've been a bit busy, is all he manages to come up with. Shinso shrugs like he doesn't care, though he probably secretly does. It helps him to avoid being accused of having affection by blaming the other boy Akitani came to see. Todoroki barely comes around anymore either. I think he was a little disappointed that I was the only one showing up. Hearing that and remembering his last conversation with Todoroki, having promised to see him again during sessions here, Akitani feels a pang of guilt in his chest. I'm a terrible friend, aren't I? His body sinks with his sulking voice by literally sinking. But a better brother, Shinso tries to cheer him up, not knowing better of Akitani's current situation. Speaking of which, where is Eri? She's normally attached to your leg. He glances around in search for the little girl. Akitani's demeanor doesn't quite change aside from mild fidgeting as he searches for a proper response. Oh. He eventually lands on, her dad wanted to see her, a technical half-lie considering Aizawa had to adopt her. He pulls from his own family history to make it a little more believably personal. He lives in America, so. Shinso solemnly nods as he takes in the lie, believing it. I get it. His consoling expression makes Akitani feel all the more guilty for withholding the truth. You probably already miss her, huh? Is it that obvious? But there's no need to lie about that. Well, Shinso hides his face with his canned coffee. Don't forget you have, friends that are here for you. Taking a sip afterwards so Akitani can't see his blush. Taken aback by Shinso's rare show of affection, Akitani is startled into silence. He cracks open his own coffee before also taking a sip, sharing the boy's embarrassment. Anyways, Eri wanted me to tell you, before she left, that she said hi. He averts his eyes before adding, you and Todoroki go to UA, right? Shinso lowers his coffee, stopping from taking another sip. Yeah. He's surprised by the question, but dismisses it just as quickly, except I'm in Gen Ed. Remember, he presumes Akitani is just curious about the hero course. Never mind that. But Akitani surprises him yet again. Shinso waits to hear the rest, curious as to what this could be about. Be careful, he certainly wasn't expecting a warning. That's not ominous at all. Shinso raises a brow that gives him an expression oddly reminiscent of Aizawa. Akitani swallows despite having not taken another sip of coffee. The UA barrier being destroyed, he hesitates before explaining his reason for concern. I don't think that it was coincidental. He pauses one last time before trying to smooth it over. I'm just saying to be cautious is all. Shinso continues to stare at Akitani. Skeptically. Perhaps even warily. Then he mumbles thanks, still not quite sure what the boy means. I don't know how or why you know that. His eyes meet Akitani's, but you be careful too. It started as a tapping. Little flicks against the glass shielding Akitani from the outside. As the sky darkened with storm clouds, however, the spears of water became thicker. Rain now rattles the windows as the droplets yell at him. He doesn't know if it's some sort of animalistic instinct, but it almost sounds as though nature is warning him. The world is trying to tell him something. Something that he would only know soaked by the cold touch of darkness and not hidden away in the warm comfort of Anteiku. He remembers what it's like. Water running down his face like tears. His hair matted and damp. Clothes drenched. The blood pouring down on him like the rain, and the only difference between the two being one's cool sting versus the other's warm stick. Akitani shakes his head to clear away those thoughts. The urge to feel the liquid on his skin again still lingers. The desire to taste it. He runs his tongue along his chapped lips, suddenly aware of how dry they are. Akatani drinks some of the coffee that he's supposed to be selling, hoping that it'll be enough to quench his thirst. He hopes that the only reason he's parched is because of the monsoon right outside the cafe. The ghoul knows that's not the truth though. That's just an excuse. Akatani knows what's actually happening. He hasn't told Eraserhead. He's not quite sure he wants to even admit it to himself. The erasure meals aren't working. They do. For a while. However, it's a more temporary fix than previously presumed. There are two problems. The first is that he's not satisfied with regular food anymore. He had thought having his taste buds return to normal would be the best thing that could happen to him, but it's comparable to having vegetables when he could be enjoying a big slice of chocolate cake. His mouth has developed a craving for flesh. The second issue is a much more concerning matter. Akatani is fairly certain that the erasure has only been increasing his appetite for flesh and blood. Eating an average meal does satisfy his hunger just like any other person. However, just like any other person, he gets hungry again later. Except, it seems his hunger is tenfold. He no longer feels famished, but very much starved. He's been checking the clock during his shifts and he's also willing to bet that the intervals in between meals before he gets hungry again has been drastically dropping in time. It went from losing minutes to hours. Akatani's nails dig into the counter like a set of claws, scratching at the wood. He feels like a caged animal. He's suddenly aware of how trapped he is. The pounding on the window is the wild stone jungle he'd familiarized himself with as a hunting ground. Now he waits for his meals to be brought to him and served. He impatiently growls, teeth gritted and grinding. Aizawa hadn't shown up for lunch. Which is annoying. Yet, he understands the man teaches at UA during the day. It's excusable and understandable. What's as frustrating as it is equally concerning is that the underground hero should be able to manage bringing dinner during his night shift. Akatani checks the clock again. Eraserhead is running late. He's never late, and this is by far later than usual if there is such a thing as late. The rainstorm suddenly feels like a much worse omen than it previously did. If the ghoul really does have such a thing as instinct based on nature's weather, then that means something bad must have happened. Akatani starts mulling over the possibilities for Aizawa's tardiness. It could be something as simple as his duties being a teacher. Perhaps he had to hold a student after class or the principal called for a meeting. Maybe Eri needed tending to. Akatani would be forgiving of the man's tardiness if the reason is parenthood for his technically adopted sister. The worst outcome comes to mind as well though. There's a chance that something bad happened. Eraserhead is an underground hero who fights criminals and villains alike. Akatani's pupils contract. Red veins begin to stem from his eyes. He stares hard at nothing in particular, an angry glare he wishes he had something to fixate on. The pressure of his fingers pressing into the cashier counter start causing it to splinter, nails carving into the wooden structure. His heart beats in his chest like a drum, loud enough to be the thunder that the storm outside is missing. The ghoul begins to worry about the safety of the pro-hero who's taken Eri under his wing. If Aizawa is in danger, the protective older brother worries that his sister could be in trouble by extension. Akatani seethes through his teeth, biting back a feral shout that he wishes he could direct at whoever dares endanger Eri. The door chime brings Akatani back to reality, his mind reeling with his body as he jumps back. When he releases his grip on the counter, wood shavings fly up in the air with his hand. His pupils dilate until they're back to normal and the veins bulging from his eyes recede just as quickly. His flow of black hair whips to the side when he turns his head to see who entered the shop, the locks still covering one side of his face. He's surprised to see Naomasa instead of Aizawa, the detective's overcoat drenched from the monsoon. Judging by Naomasa's expression, the man is as equally disturbed as the boy. His rectangular eyes meet Akatani's, a solemn silence communicating what the boy already knows. Akatani would cry, but the storm is already shedding enough tears for him with its downpour of rain. Where's Eraserhead? Akatani asks the question anyways. Though he knows the answer. Though he doesn't want to hear it confirmed. In his mind, rationally, there would be no other reason for the detective to come see him instead. Naomasa looks off to the side, breaking eye contact. There was an incident, he begins. His words are slow. He's treading lightly, so as not to spook a wild animal. Akatani tenses anyways. The wet squelch of the detective's shoes on the floor alerts Akitani to the man's attempt at subtly moving closer. When Naomasa sees the boy flinch back, he stops. The next few seconds that pass aren't quite a standoff. However, there is tension radiating between the two. It makes Naomasa hesitate. He's never sure of himself when in the presence of the ghoul. He never knows how to interact with a boy who's also capable of creating the crime scenes he's seen. You don't have to come, but he's requesting to speak with you. But those words must be the right ones to have said. Akitani's visible eye widens, the green within glowing with childlike hopefulness. There's an unspoken stutter from the boy's end that he tries to cover up, but Naomasa notes it in his memory. When Akitani recovers, he speaks with a hardened resolve that doesn't quite make it to his gaze. Take me to him. Akitani had assumed the worst. The storm, Aizawa's absence, Naomasa's arrival, the unelaborated incident that the detective spoke of. It all pointed to another person leaving his life. Not just his, but Eri's, who needs the underground hero most. He sighs to nobody in particular, frustration and relief blending like gasoline and water. Now he's in a police cruiser headed for UA. Neither of the two locations did he ever think he'd be in, let alone for the reasons that he is and will be. His gaze falls to his lap, not quite sure of where to look in the vehicle and unwilling to stare at Detective Naomasa. But he is, at the very least, still willing to speak. He wants to know more about what happened, even if he's already conjured up his own resolution in his head. Does this have to do with the barrier being broken? Akitani nervously fidgets with his fingers. Akitani can feel Naomasa's eyes on him, the detective taking his eyes off the road momentarily to glance over at the boy. He had been kind enough not to stick Akitani in the back, allowing him to sit up front in the passenger seat. Something about the equal sitting up front is an assurance that this isn't an arrest. Yes, a group of villains broke into the USJ during a class trip there. Akitani stops fiddling with his hands and lifts his head to return the detective's gaze upon hearing that. But Naomasa has already returned his attention to the road, saying the rest. The barrier was a distraction for them to steal a schedule. Naomasa's grip on the steering wheel tightens. Aizawa's theory was right all along. You two were right to think something was suspicious. Akitani can sense the frustration coming from the man. Radiating in wafts of smell through his sweat, the ghoul picks up on Naomasa's feelings through more than just his words. You couldn't have known for sure. Don't blame yourself. Akitani tries consoling the detective as best as he can without touching him. He's not up to a hug or anything, and he doubts Naomasa is either. Especially considering they're in the middle of driving right now. But he does want to try to be of some consolation. He can tell that the detective is genuinely trying his best. Naomasa huffs, not really valuing the boy's words. He does appreciate the gesture though. Thanks, kid, offering a small smile in return. Akitani can tell that it's fake, having utilized false faces before himself, but he doesn't say anything more. When the unlikely duo finally reaches UA, Naomasa leads Akitani to the medbay. Not the nurse's office. Where he's at is a room not likely meant for students. One reserved for overnight patients, with more severe or critical cases. Like a razorhead. When Akitani sees Aizawa, he's not even sure that the man is the underground hero at first. So many bandages wrap Aizawa head to toe that his face is practically concealed in gauze. Akitani's fingers curl into his palm, nails cutting into the skin of his hand that's now clenched as a fist. Who did this to you? He can't suppress the shaking in his voice as well as he can the tremors of his body. Luckily, the detective and the underground hero mistaken the reason as worry and not rage. Naomasa sees Aizawa struggling to speak, so he hands the teacher a glass of water while answering for him. They called themselves the League of Villains. Akitani's not sure if the next bit is a jab at him or if it's meant to be a joke, friends of yours, but he takes the question rather personally of an insult. Can't say they are. The venom in his tone has Naomasa swallowing at the same time Aizawa takes a sip of water. Akitani then momentarily redirects his attention, noticing a certain absence in the room. His head swivels left and right as he scours the area before asking, "Where's Eri?" Having wetted his vocal cords, Aizawa takes the chance to answer that one. Don't worry, she was here at the teacher's lounge with all might. Akitani's heart beats quicker at the mention of the number one hero. She was nowhere near the attack. Hearing Eri was under the care of the world's strongest hero puts Akatani at ease, but he quickly recovers from his starstruck stupor to emphasize, where is she now though? With Hisashi, Aizawa pauses when he realizes his mistake before correcting himself, I mean present Mike. Akatani inwardly beams at the mention of another hero, but doesn't let himself outwardly show any signs of excitement. Aizawa takes the stoic disposition as a sign of skepticism. Don't worry, Mike is a close friend of mine. He can be trusted with her. Aizawa purposefully doesn't mention Namori's involvement though. He's not sure how the ghoul would react to his little sister being watched by an R-rated heroine. Not that Namori would influence a girl Eri's age. Akatani allows himself to relax a little bit at that, knowing that Eri is safe. He suddenly feels like a storm drain, the downpour outside knocking him down into a cushioned seat at Aizawa's bedside. Kid. The wounded hero grunts when he tries to sit up. Naomasa also moves with a concerned demeanor. But Akatani waves them both off, dismissing their worries. Thank you. He can tell that Aizawa is making a confused expression by the way the bandages around his face crease and fold, so he elaborates, for not bringing her to the USJ. He's not sure what he would have done if Eri were harmed. Or worse. For what it's worth, I'm glad that I didn't either. Aizawa rests his eyes by closing them. His body sinks back into the cushioning of the hospital bed's mattress. He seems just as relieved. Akatani then realizes just how exhausted each and every one of them truly are. Naomasa slumps into a chair on the opposite side of Akatani and Aizawa, almost defeated in tune. They both look like they've taken a beating. Akatani supposes Aizawa has in a literal sense. These are the two that he entrusted to Eri. It's not that he doesn't see they clearly tried, but Akatani starts to regret his decision. He regrets decreasing his activity as the ghoul. Maybe he would have noticed the significant decrease in villain activity leading up to a league of them. He could have potentially seen the attack on USJ coming and maybe he would have participated in it. Akatani rests his head in his hands, the thought weighing heavily on him. He wonders if he actually would have been a part of the villain attack had Eraserhead not found him. Not with Eri. He knows that if he hadn't handed her over to them, then he wouldn't have gotten involved with villains. He wonders if he would have become one without her though. He wonders what kind of path that he was on before. Naomasa called him a vigilante but Toga had called him a villain. According to society, there isn't very much of a difference between the two categories. If all he wants is to help himself to a huge meal like the Yakuza, then an entire class of students wouldn't have been a bad place to pick up from where he left off. Akatani shakes his head, letting his hands fall from his face. He knows that he's not thinking rationally. That he's just hungry. It's his ghoulish cravings talking, not him. When he begins to starve, he doesn't care who it is that he devours, he'll just eat. Like when he ate his mother. He knows that if he hadn't met Aizawa, he would have just stuck to eating villains. Maybe the League would have been victims to the ghoul long before the attack on USJ could have taken place. Kid. Aizawa's voice sounds distant. So far away that it's barely worth calling a whisper. Kid. But the rapen is a little louder that time. It's enough to pull Akatani from the depths of his thoughts so that he doesn't drown in the ocean that the storm outside had made. When he breaks the surface, he gasps for air. He sees Aizawa and Naomasa staring at him expectantly. For what, he doesn't know. His breath hitches and he shivers from the cold that seems to have worked its way inside. I asked if you're hungry. He certainly wasn't expecting to hear that. Aizawa's tone is as soft as his bloodshot eyes though. It's not accusatory. It's not harsh or reprimanding. The underground hero is genuinely asking out of concern. Akatani's stomach growls in response, making him blush. He's not sure what gave him away before his body betrayed him, but he nods in embarrassed admittance. Yeah, but you're in no condition to. He tries denying the offer anyways since he knows the process is strenuating for the hero. There's some leftovers from the cafeteria that you can have. Naomasa can get it for you, but Aizawa is quick to cut Akatani off. Sure. Naomasa nods before pushing off with his knees to stand up. Sit tight while I get you some grub, kid. His overcoat gets discarded, hung over the chair's back to dry, before he heads for the sliding door. Akatani is about to make another attempt of refusal, but he doesn't have to when the nurse makes her entry from the other side of the door. He recognizes her as Recovery Girl, a short older lady who uses a cane to hobble in. What's this I hear about using your quirk, Naomasa is amazed by the woman's acute skill of deduction considering they didn't mention Aizawa's quirk per se. The way that the elder heroine uses her cane as a third leg makes Akatani view her as a wounded animal, the limp mimicking the loss of a fourth limb. Despite her mild handicap, she still manages to close the distance between the entrance and Aizawa's bed rather quickly. Didn't I tell you that you received damage to your eyes? Her tiny head shakes in disapproval as she starts to remove the gauze around his face. I haven't even changed your bandages yet. When Akatani sees the gnarly cut beneath the underground hero's right eye, he can't withhold a gasp. It's still healing, but it's sure to leave a permanent deep scar. For someone whose quirk relies on sight to function, the time of usage will no doubt diminish. It's not as bad as it looks, kid. Aizawa tries assuring the boy, but his nurse wears an expression that says otherwise. Now is a critical time to be healing. It's best if you don't use your quirk for a few weeks, at the very least. Recovery girl gives her doctor's orders while applying a fresh, clean set of bandages to hide the gash. But Aizawa isn't persuaded. The boy can only eat if he tries explaining Akatani's situation in defense of the situation. But Akatani is quick to cut him off. It's okay. The outburst draws everybody's attention, making Akatani recoil and shrink in on himself. Knowing Eraserhead's health is on the line though, he can't allow himself to back down. I'm not hungry, so he lies. Are you sure? You shouldn't go weeks without eating. Aizawa's bandages crease with concern. And despite Recovery Girl's care for her patient, she too shares that same sentiment. Akatani stands up, nodding a little more forcefully than necessary, attempting to come across as confident. I've done it before. He turns to hide his face from him, forgetting that Naomasa is on the other side when he says the rest. I would try not to eat for as long as I could. Akatani's eyes widen when he sees the detective staring at him in bewilderment. Whatever Naomasa saw, Akatani ducks his head down to cover up. The boy slides his hands into his pockets, not wanting to fidget with them or ball them into fists. He feels in his pants the familiar leather mask of his ghoul persona. The thought of hunting on a rainy night is so alluring that he salivates a little. So long as you continue to keep that restraint, then there's nothing to worry about. Naomasa's voice draws his gaze back up. The detective is wearing a stern expression, but his eyes appear so trusting that it hurts to look into them for too long. Akatani averts his gaze. He's been given a chance he doesn't deserve. They're willing to trust him, to rehabilitate him, and he's about to throw that all away. To be fair, they'd only been fooling themselves. They were on borrowed time before Aizawa's accident. Who they had been kidding, Akatani doesn't know. All he does know is that their way didn't work. He tried. He really did. But what he's done and what he's about to do is his fundamental nature. The ghoul vows right then and there to find the one responsible for harming Aizawa, and to satisfy his hunger that way. You're going to be fine. Right? Aizawa asks from behind him. Akatani turns around to face the hero, beaming the brightest smile he can muster, teeth and all. Yeah, he enthusiastically lies again. The clatter of tin against glass follows a canned coffee down into the disposable at the bottom of the vending machine. Akatani reaches in and takes the beverage, popping the lid open with a flick of his thumb. He was surprised that he didn't find Shinso loitering by the machine. Then again, he was very much relieved as well. He didn't come to the Quirk support group meeting place for idle chit-chat this time. Akatani, a blonde blur rams into the boy all too suddenly. He nearly drops his drink, startled from his very brief thoughts. When he sees that it's the girl he called to meet him, he relaxes a little. Hey Himiko, his eyes shift from her to another presence. A guy with patches of gnarled and wrinkled skin covering much of his face and neck looks about the place with disinterest. Ah, who's your friend? Akatani feels the need to ask. The obvious burn victim turns his gaze to meet Akatani's, eyes drooping in boredom as he introduces himself, Dabi. Akatani can't help but raise a brow at the name. Dabi just raises a brow right back. You texted me saying you wanted me to introduce you to more of my friends. Himiko finally detaches herself from Akatani to present Dabi with a mild flourish, so I thought I'd just bring one along. Akatani's eyes widen momentarily, remembering that he did indeed do that. Oh, he steps forward to introduce himself in return, bowing at the waist to be respectful. Sorry for being rude. I'm Akatani Mikumo. Dabi doesn't seem fazed in the slightest. He's back to inspecting his surroundings, searching for something amongst the nothing. So, Quirk counseling, his drawl is as impassive as he looks. He doesn't seem impressed by Akatani nor the location. Ah, not exactly. The boy chuckles awkwardly as he returns to standing up straight. Trying to think of a way to break the ice, he winds up scratching the back of his head. Feeling his hair course through his fingers, Akatani perks up, finding something to say. What brand hair dye did you use? He nods his head in indication to Dabi's black pointed hair. Dabi falters, taken aback by the question. His shock quickly turns into something else, eyes narrowing. At least Akatani has his attention now. How did you? Akatani points to his own hair, takes one to know one. Which earns a shock from Himiko next. The blonde bounces back over to the boy, leaning into his personal space. You dye your hair? Her yellow eyes glint in the light as she asks, what color is it normally? Akatani hesitates, unsure of whether or not he should answer. Then he remembers that this is Himiko. Even with Dabi listening in, he sighs and relents. Green. But his cheeks are bright red. Ooh. I can picture that. Himiko plays with the boy's curly hair by twirling it around her fingers. She imagines the color matching the blood that's rushing to his face and how he'd be lit up like a Christmas tree, giggling to herself. When Himiko switches her sights to Dabi, she's expecting him to share his natural hair color as well. The boy covered in burns sighs, all the stress you give me made my hair turn white, so I had no choice but to dye it, but Akatani is relieved that he's capable of dry humor at the very least. Akatani laughs, agreeing wholeheartedly with Dabi. Do you think I could be her next victim? He asks in between guffaws. Himiko looks between the two boys before pouting, you two sure are getting along rather quickly, and crosses her arms under her bust. Yeah, well. Dabi turns his body away from him as though he's ready to leave, I'm not really the social butterfly. If it's a friend that you were wanting. Akatani suddenly remembers the reason that he called Himiko here and had asked her to introduce him to her friends. Oh, no, he winces when he realizes that came out wrong, I mean yes, but Dabi lingers in between Akatani and the exit, forcing Akatani to get to the point. I'm looking for, the boy just isn't sure how to word it, you wouldn't happen to be a part of a league, would you? Dabi looks more confused than he did previously, a league, responding quizzically. Akatani shakes his head, never mind, before turning back to Himiko. I just thought because of Uta and his connection to the Yakuza, that maybe you'd know where I could find. He realizes that he should have been more direct with her a little too late. Sighing to himself, he tries to explain, there's some bad people I'm looking for and. He trails off when he sees the expression of hurt in Himiko's face. He realizes how much smaller she is than him when he hears her soft whimper, you associate me with bad. No. Akatani blurts out in an initial panic. He fumbles over himself as much as his words, not knowing whether he should say something or hug her. Dabi makes a strange noise from behind him before he gets the chance to apologize. When Akatani turns to see what the weird sound was about, he sees Dabi's non-scarred skin is rather pale. Wah! And that the burned boy's blue eyes are fixated on a newcomer. Shoto Todoroki approaches them from the opposite direction. Mikumo. Todoroki nods in greeting to the boy that he recognizes before glancing between Himiko and Dabi, who are your friends? Todoroki. Akatani feels sweat beating down his forehead as he's surrounded by the bunch of familiar faces. The only way this situation could possibly get worse is if Shinso suddenly materialized out of thin air to join them. He swallows, trying to get the right words to come out of his throat, but nothing coming up. His head swivels back to Himiko first. The blonde has hidden her hurt, faking a smile as she waves to Todoroki. Himiko Toga. Her introduction is briefer than usual, but Akatani is admittedly relieved that's the case. Are you Akatani's friend? Yes. Todoroki doesn't sound very sure of that answer, but Akatani passes it off as part of the tension in the awkward situation. After all, Dabi isn't paying Todoroki any mind. He's been frozen in place, pale flesh tone making Akatani believe he really could have sickbed to frostbite. Todoroki returns his attention to Akatani, mutually ignoring the other boy. I actually came to offer you a gift, Mikumo. Akatani raises both of his eyebrows at that surprise, a gift. When Todoroki hands him the present, he isn't expecting 2 pink slips. For you and Eri, Todoroki's elaboration doesn't do much to actually explain anything until Akatani reads what's written on the paper in his hand. tickets to UA's sports festival, the boy can't help but feel some elation. He'd always seen the event aired on television, but never attended it in person before. However, his excitement is short-lived. He pauses when he realizes, wait. Eri, also confusing Todoroki. Oh, Shinso didn't tell you. Akatani's grip on the tickets tightens. He's not sure how many more surprises he can take right now. Tell me what? Todoroki's heterochromic eyes squint as he tries to make sense of the situation. Akatani glances at Himiko, not all that shocked to see her staring right back. She's the only one that knows the truth, but she knows better than to call him out if he lies. Despite what he said, he doesn't associate her with bad. He hopes that the trust they share will let her know that. Eri's father took her to America. She tilts her head but says nothing, visitation rights and all that. Your father? Todoroki's mood significantly darkens. Akatani swivels his head from Himiko back to him. He sees the jewel-quirked boy's fists are clenched at his sides. Dabi, as distant as he was, picks up on the change in attitude as well. Remembering Todoroki's past with his own father, Akatani's eyes can't help but be drawn between the boy's scar and Dabi's burns. Shush, she's safe. She's perfectly fine. He tries to sound assuring before allowing himself to succumb to his sorrow. I just miss her is all. Ya no. Noticing the change in atmosphere, as well as everyone's demeanor, Todoroki also calms down. Yes, he has a sibling amongst his brothers and sister that he misses too. Even Dabi ducks his head in the back, relating in some way or another. Sensing somber moods, Himiko tries to salvage the situation by jumping in the middle. Can I have the extra ticket instead? Her bright and bubbly act pulls everyone out from their sulking states successfully. Clearass. I really wanna go. Oh, sure. Akatani hopes that saying yes might help make up for upsetting her earlier. It must to some extent, since Himiko stands on her tippy toes to plant a K on his cheek. Yay. It's a date, she cheers while snatching the ticket that she's claimed for herself. Dabi rolls his eyes while watching the entire exchange. Having had enough, he turns his back to them. I'm leaving, and announces his exit. Himiko teasingly sticks her tongue out at him, even though he can't see it. Oh, don't be such a sour seagull, and doesn't seem all that bothered that she made him uncomfortable. Returning to his stoic self, Todoroki turns towards Akatani to say, you have strange friends, Mikumo. Wanting to retort, Akatani opens his mouth. When he realizes that he can't, his shoulders sag and he sulks while admitting, I know. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.